Turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew as we have read earlier. And we're in Matthew chapter 15 and continuing there. I find it interesting as going through the book of Matthew, and we have just talked about where Jesus is, and most of his time, as far as the ministry of Jesus, he is around the Sea of Galilee. He's a Galilean. Jesus of Galilee, as people talk about Jesus. And so most of it is around the Sea of Galilee. We know Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen, and so they were from around the Sea of Galilee and making their living there. And so, but he does travel around to different areas. And last week we talked about from Galilee he went north to Syrophoenicia. The Syrophoenicia woman, she was a Gentile. And her daughter needed to be healed, and she begs Jesus to heal her daughter. And Jesus talks about, and I think about the conversation that Jesus had about, he said that he was sent to the Jews, not to the Gentiles. That he, in fact, he said that you don't feed the dogs, calling her as Gentile a dog. And that was the normal language used from Jews toward Gentiles. And yet she responds back, yes, but even the dogs lick the crumbs that fall from the table. And Jesus commends her faith and heals her daughter. And so we have this Gentile being healed. And that leads us on to the next miracle. We travel from Syrophoenicia, we travel down south, but then we go toward the Decapolis area. This too is a Gentile area where the Decapolis is. This is not inhabited by the Jews, mostly Gentiles. We have been in this area before. I was talking to Julie's mom yesterday, or she was talking to me. We were talking about this lesson, and she said, I wonder, we're going to talk about the feeding of the 4,000. In this particular area, Jesus was here before in Matthew chapter 8. And he heals a Gentile. He was demon-possessed. He was living in the tombs. He calls the demons to come out of the man and go into the pigs, and the pigs ran down toward the sea. Y'all remember that? Okay, that was a Gentile. And he wanted to follow Jesus. And Jesus said, no, you stay in the area. The feeding of the 4,000 it is that we have here. I'll call this the forgotten miracle. Anytime you read of feeding the 5,000, isn't it? Jesus fed the 5,000. Remember when we had feeding of the 5,000? The 5,000 were Jews. We talked about they had this church over this particular rock. They called it the Church of the Loaves and Fishes, and they said it was on this particular rock that Jesus laid out the loaves and fishes and blessed it. And so they had a kind of a monument to it and called it the Church of Loaves and Fishes. It's right there by the Sea of Galilee. You know, I really don't think that's the rock that Jesus laid the fish out on. But somewhere around here, there was some place he did feed the 5,000, whether it was that particular spot or somewhere very near to it. And so you have this kind of monument, the remembrance. This is the feeding of the 5,000. This is where the feeding of the 5,000 takes place. We don't have that with the feeding of the 4,000. There's some debate. You can talk about reading commentaries and such. Were these Jews or were they Gentiles? We're not told in particular, but I think because of the region where it is, because it happens just right after the healing of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, that she was a Gentile, that we have this 4,000 taking place, and I believe that's my commentary on that these are Gentiles. I know there's some debate about that. If you're hard and fast they were Jews, That's all right too, but I believe they're Gentiles. It's in this Gentile region. I know the Jews would follow Jesus, and many did. But just think about this. If this man in Matthew chapter 8 was there in the region, don't you know he talked about Jesus? And Julie's mom mentioned, I wondered if the 4,000 were there because of that man saying, Jesus is coming to our area. You need to see him. I wonder. That's a great question, isn't it? To wonder about why was he left and not following after Jesus. Jesus said, you stay here. Maybe so that 4,000 would see Jesus later on. But we have the feeding of the 4,000. I believe it was a separate event from the feeding of the 5,000. For one, you have the feeding of the 5,000. The difference between that and the 4,000, one is there's 5,000 mentioned here. There's 4,000 mentioned here. Now the feeding of the 4,000, you could say, well, he just said 4,000 here and then 5,000 here. If you had 5,000 and you have 4,000, and some would say, well, it's just the same event, except the numbers are different. The feeding of the 5,000 are found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All four Gospels record the feeding of the 4,000. The feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 4,000 found only in Matthew and only in Mark. When we go to the next slide, I'll show you the difference in that, why I believe it's Gentile also, of Matthew and Mark. In the feeding of the 5,000, you have, what do we have? We have 5 loaves and 2 fish. In the feeding of the 4,000, he said we have 7 loaves and a few fish. In the feeding of the 5,000, it takes place on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. The feeding of the 4,000 takes place on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. So different places, different amounts, different people, different miracles. But we always talk about feeding of the multitudes. We talk about the feeding of the 5,000, and the feeding of the 4,000 is the forgotten miracle. When I talked about it's found in Matthew and Mark, you think about the audience that Matthew wrote to and the audience that Mark wrote to. In this next slide, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew is writing to Jews. He's affirming the fact Jesus is a son of David. He is the Messiah that we have longed for. He is the one that we have looked for. He is going to be the King of Kings, and he's establishing this kingship. And Matthew talks about kingdom parables, kingdomship. And that he includes the Gentiles also. The kingdom is coming to the Jews. The kingdom is coming to the Gentiles also. The book of Matthew. Mark writes to the Gentiles. He affirms the beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The Gentiles don't care anything about he's the son of David, don't care anything about his lineage, except that he is the Son of God. And so Mark affirms the deity of Jesus. Not just the kingship, but the deity. Luke talks about a very systematic writing. I'm writing down evidence for you systematically to show that Jesus is the Son of God. I show these things carefully investigated, he says. It seemed to write an orderly account. So Luke goes step by step to show evidence. Jesus is the Son of God. He's writing to Gentiles also. John is writing to all mankind. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The deity of Jesus. So Matthew and Mark deal with the kingship and the deity of Jesus toward Gentiles. In the feeding of the 4,000, I see 3 things. I see the compassion of Jesus. I see the provision of Jesus, and then the satisfaction of Jesus. Let's look at these three things. First of all, we look at the compassion of Jesus. When it says that he beheld the multitude, as they go, let me read this, beginning at verse 29, Matthew chapter 15. Jesus departed thence, came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up a mountain and sat down there. Great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, and blind, and dumb, and maimed, and many others, and cast them at the feet of Jesus. And he healed them, insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to be whole, and the lame to walk, and the blind to see. And they glorified the God of Israel. If you wonder, why did Jesus make the lame walk, the blind to see? Why did he heal all kinds of diseases? In this answer, they glorified the God of Israel. That's another reason I think it's Gentiles, because they're saying they're glorifying the God of Israel. They glorified God. And everything that Jesus did and everything that Jesus said pointed toward God. May you glorify God. That's what he said to us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light so shine among men that they would see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Everything that we do and everything that we say ought to point people toward God, to bring him glory. And so they glorified the God of Israel. And Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. I have compassion. Several times, if you would look up the word compassion, the compassion of Jesus. Mark chapter 1, verse 41. A leper comes to Jesus and he says, Lord, heal me. And Jesus had compassion on him, and he put forth his hand and touched the leper. He didn't have to touch him to heal him, did he? He didn't. He touched the leper. Lepers were called the untouchables. You did not touch a leper. You did not even come close to a leper. If a leper was coming your way and you met him on the road, they would shout out, unclean, and they would pass by with a large area between the two. You didn't get close to a leper. You did not want leprosy. You certainly didn't touch them. That might have been the first time that someone had touched that leper. Jesus had compassion on him and touched him. He needed that physical touch. And Jesus gave it to him. Not just healed his leprosy, but touched him. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 35 and 36, it said, he healed all types of sickness among the people. And when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion because they were scattered abroad as sheep without a shepherd. And then he tells his disciples to pray that the harvest, that laborers would be sent for the harvest. He saw them as sheep without a shepherd, and he had compassion upon them. He had compassion in Luke chapter 7, verse 12. There's a funeral procession coming, and Jesus meets this funeral procession, and there is a widow there. So she has lost her husband, and now she has lost her only son. And Jesus, when the Lord saw her, he had compassion upon her and said, do not weep. And he healed the son, raised him back from the dead. Several times used, and this is not the only times. There were others. I just didn't go through these others. It says Jesus had compassion upon them. He saw one of the untouchable, one of the outcasts, and he touched him and had compassion. He saw the multitudes who needed to hear, they needed to hear the good news, and he had compassion upon them. He felt the heartbroken widow who had lost her family, and he had compassion upon her. Oh, the compassion of Jesus. That's where it begins, isn't it? We cannot go and save the lost till we have compassion, till we feel, till we hurt when they hurt, till we know that they are lost and we yearn to teach them. And cannot help it. Just have compassion upon them. Jesus had compassion among the multitude, I believe even the Gentiles. And so as we talk about the feeding of the 4,000, now we see the provision of Jesus. Jesus said, how many loaves do you have? And they said, well, we have 7 and a few little fish. It was just in Matthew chapter 14, they fed the 5,000. And so now they're on this side of the sea, and disciples have any doubt what's going to happen? We just had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now we've got 7 loaves and a few fish. This is more than what we had over there. Do you think there's any doubt what's going to happen? I think there was, because these are Gentiles. Another reason I think that they're Gentiles. I think there's a little doubt about it. I know he'll feed the Jews. Jesus, all the Jews can remember God given manna from heaven, bread from heaven to the Jews in the wandering of the wilderness. God provided for the Jews. He's going to provide for the Gentiles also. They saw, I believe, the Syrophoenician woman was laying the foundation of what's going to happen in this next miracle. They saw Gentiles can have great faith. And now Gentiles are reaping the reward. Others are reaping the reward. They ate all that they were, and they broke them and had 7 baskets left over. That's another comparison. They had 12 baskets left over. In the feeding of the 5,000, they had 7 left over, feeding of the 4,000. Jesus gives plenty, doesn't he? The provision of Jesus. We think about all through the Bible, from Adam and Eve up until us today, God provides. God provided for Adam and Eve, had everything that they could possibly need in the garden. We call it paradise. Everything that they needed. In the wanderings of the wilderness, he gave them water. He gave them food. Their clothes didn't even wear out. Through 40 years of wandering, God provided for them. With Abraham's sacrifice, when he took his son up on the mountain, and as Isaac said, I see the wood and I see the fire. He said, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham said, God will provide. And we see Jesus, and we remember Jesus being the sacrifice for us upon the cross. God provided salvation for us. And God provides a home in heaven for us. God is a God who provides. He gave more than enough. He had a few fish and a few loaves, and he fed the multitude. God is the God who provides. Not only is God the God who provides, but we see the satisfaction of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 33, well, it says that I have compassion on the multitude. Let me continue reading. I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days. The word continue is more than just they are with me. It means they are with me and they are attentive toward me, that they are with me and have no desire to be anywhere else. Can you imagine as Jesus is healing all these people? Don't you know he's preaching too? You know he is. We don't have recorded with the feeding of the 4,000. We don't have the Sermon on the Mount. But you know these 3 days he's healing, he's teaching. And the people cannot leave. They continued with me. It's not that, well, I have someone in my family that is lame, and I take them to Jesus, and Jesus makes them walk, and so we just go on our way after that. No, they continued with Jesus. They couldn't leave him. And Matthew said, we don't have enough to feed these. I like what Mark said about this. Look, and the disciples answered him and says, from whence can a man satisfy these men? Who can satisfy them? I'm telling you, we serve a God who satisfies. Psalm 107. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness, for his wonderful works to the children of men, for he satisfies the longing soul and fills the hungry soul with goodness. We sing the song number 659. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know it's true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. Oh, the story of Jesus. Only the story of Jesus satisfies our longings. Satisfies us. Who can satisfy these people? And there's people in the world today, they're saying, who can satisfy me? I've turned toward one thing or another. Are you satisfied with love? Do you know what love is? And people are, you think about the song, looking for love in all the wrong places. You can't find love. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 through 17 says, love not the world, neither the things that are in this world. We can't be satisfied with love because we're looking for love in all the wrong places. You can only find satisfying love in Christ Jesus. That's when you know what love truly is. This agape, self-sacrificing love. To love, Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 and follow. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's love. Self-sacrificing love. You looking for hope? You can't find it in this world. 1 Corinthians 15 Paul talks about death and life and the resurrection. He said, if in this life we have hope, if in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. This world cannot give us hope, cannot be satisfied with hope. You talk about peace. The Bible talks about a peace that passes all understanding. You can't find peace in your life without God. You cannot be satisfied with peace without God. He offers a peace the world can't understand. I don't know how you can have peace. And the world looks at you as Christians and the turmoil and the trouble that you go through. And they say, how can you be at peace? Because I have the God who satisfies. How can you have joy in your life with all the trouble and trial in your life? John 16, verse 33. In this world you have tribulation, but I have overcome the world. God is a God who satisfies. I believe the feeding of the 4,000 shows us who God is. Not only to the Jews, but to the Gentiles also. We see the compassion of Jesus as he goes out into the world. I think based upon the fact that this Gentile woman showed her faith and the disciples were ready to accept, Gentiles can have faith also, even great faith. Gentiles need Jesus also. And Jesus provides. And only Jesus satisfies. And so, if you're in this world searching, something's missing. There's something in my life I don't know. I haven't been satisfied. I've been looking. I just know there's this emptiness. There's this void. won't you come to Jesus? Won't you turn toward Jesus? He satisfies our longings as nothing else can do. If we can help you and encourage you, maybe even deciding to become a Christian, or whether it is that you're a Christian and you have felt emptiness and need to come back to Jesus and be strengthened again, encouraged again, prayed for again, whatever we can do to help you, won't you come right now while we stand and while we sing.